Book title Aishvarya the Cult. Author's name M. Aishvarya. Book company Blue Hills Publications. Chapter title The Eclipse, Volume G, A Dinner. Note: the above manuscript is based on a chapter from the novel Aishvarya the Cult, written by M. Aishvarya, going to be published by Blue Hills Publications. Copyright reserved by Blue Hills Publications. The Eclipse, Volume G, A Dinner. Author name M. Aishvarya. Mr. Augusty thought for a while and then began to tell the hermit why he had come. My daughter got killed. I was able to link with her entity. Even I do have an essence in me. Could any way be found to enable me to touch the entity of my daughter? Asked Mr. Augusty. The hermit had a light laugh. Human desire, the more they get, the more they want, remarked the hermit. And it must be your curious wife who must have told you to ask this weird question, asked the hermit. Yes, master, replied Mr. Augusty. Your essence can leave your body only after death. Trying anything before that will be harmful and against nature, warned the hermit. Master, we request for your help to meet our daughter, said Mr. Augusty. You have an adopted daughter. What about her? Asked the hermit. We are using her as the vessel to connect with our daughter on the night of the eclipse, replied Mr. Augusty. But this time you will need more, said the hermit. Mr. Augusty listened with attention. You have a body. You cannot reach up to the entity of your daughter. It can work the other way. And for that, we will need to feed your daughter with more food, explained the hermit. How will I do that? Asked Mr. Augusty. I can tell you the way. Can you do it? Asked the hermit. At home, Mrs. Augusty fed Delta. The lady and the adopted girl watched TV until the latter fell asleep. Mrs. and Mr. Augusty took the girl to her bed and left her there. The couple left the room. Kavya appeared and sat on the chest of Delta and began to bite her neck. The next day, Ma! Shouted Delta. Ma! Shouted Delta again desperately. Mrs. and Mr. Augusty woke up. They rushed to the room of the girl. The girl had fallen on the floor and was trying to stand up but was unable to rise. What happened? Asked a concerned Mr. Augusty. I feel very weak. I cannot move my limbs at all, complained Delta. I will help you get up, do not worry, said Mr. Augusty and helped the girl get up from the floor. At the hospital. Low hemoglobin. I am giving you medication that will make her feel better, said the doctor to Mr. Augusty. Mr. Augusty had occupied a chair and was looking at the doctor, who was seated in another chair. Between them there was a table. We appreciate the way you are taking care of the adopted girl, Mr. Augusty. The doctor appreciated Mr. Augusty. At the unknown location. The ghost took a lot of energy from the adopted girl, Mr. Augusty reported to the hermit. Give the girl rest, or else she will be found dead in a mysterious way, cautioned the hermit. But what will happen now? Asked Mr. Augusty. Wait for the eclipse, replied the hermit. Mr. Augusty remained quiet. The eclipse. That night, Mr. Augusty woke up after all had fallen asleep. He looked at his wife. Mrs. Augusty was asleep. Mr. Augusty went to the room to check his adopted daughter. Delta was asleep too. Mr. Augusty went to another room. He spread a mat on the floor, drew a circle around it, and lay there. In another dimension. Mrs. Agasti was sitting on a bench and looking at the children playing. She looked at the empty bench near her and wept. "Missing me, Ma?" said a familiar voice. Mrs. Agasti looked to her front. Her eyes went wide open out of bewilderment. Kavya was standing in front. "Kavya, my daughter!" Tears welled up in the eyes of the lady out of joy. She stood up from the bench and embraced her daughter, raining kisses on the forehead and the cheeks of the girl. In the house, Mrs. Agasti was lying on her bed with the ghost of Kavya biting her neck. In another dimension, Mrs. Agasti was sitting beside her daughter. "Where is Dad?" asked Kavya. "You have to find him. He must be around," replied Mrs. Agasti. "Wait, let me find him. Dad will be nearby," said Kavya and began to move about. Mr. Agasti was under a tree. Kavya ran up to him. "Daddy!" Mr. Agasti looked at the girl. He was overwhelmed with joy. The girl ran into the arms of her father. In the house, "Kavya!" shouted Mr. Agasti and got up from the mat. Then he realized he was in a dark room with a candle burning therein. The ghost of Kavya was looking at him. It remained outside the circle drawn around the mat on which Mr. Agasti was lying. Mr. Agasti felt horrified on seeing the ghost. Kavya vanished. At the location of the hermit. "Thank you, Master, for helping me meet my daughter. I was able to touch her in a certain way." Mr. Agasti thanked the hermit. "And I can feel that you want to meet your daughter even more often. Am I right?" asked the hermit. "I wish it could happen," replied Mr. Agasti. "You know the way to meet your daughter now. Just be careful that you do not get addicted to it. Too much of anything will be harmful," cautioned the hermit. "You must remember that you are breaking the rule of nature. There will be its consequence," warned the hermit. "I will keep it in mind," responded Mr. Agasti with his head bowed. "I just want to know who killed her." "Just do not get addicted to the link with the other world," warned the hermit. In the house, Mr. Agasti found Mrs. Agasti delighted and singing. She was happy to be able to connect with her dead daughter in a certain way. The months that followed, Mr. Agasti encouraged Delta to have online friends. Delta liked to have new friends online. She came across a girl named Nitya. Mr. Agasti told Delta to invite her online friend Nitya to a dinner. Accordingly, Delta invited Nitya and the latter came to the house of Mr. Agasti. Mr. Agasti took the girls on a tour. Nitya and Delta slept together in the room of Kavya. The girls had no idea about the reality of the room. At night, the entity of Kavya bit the necks of Delta and Nitya. About the author, M. Aishvarya, fondly called Maverick Aishvarya by his friends, is a prolific writer. He is currently working as a manuscript writer for movie making.